Welcome to Tuesday Talks. My name is Judy Zorn. I'm the Executive Director of the Great Lakes Chamber Orchestra. And today I am with Dibby Smith. Hi, Dibby.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. And in fact, we are in Dibby's home with this beautiful fireplace blazing and her pumpkins on the mantle. And it's just very, very fall-y out, as we all know. But I thank you for joining us again for Tuesday Talks, and we've had a wonderful experience meeting and talking with so many people, not only in our community, but people who have touched the lives of the life of the orchestra and have helped the orchestra in so many ways. So today we are having an opportunity to chat with Dibby, and Dibby has, well, a long history with the orchestra. And before we get into that, I know that Dibby has also a long history here in this area, in this Petoskey area. So you have some family history that goes back pretty far, don't you?
That's correct. My husband Scott, his great-grandparents came up here in the 1890s on their honeymoon.
Okay, well.
And came to Wallen Lake and fell in love with it. And he actually had come up the year before because of asthma. He came up from Indiana for the clear air and brought his wife back on their honeymoon, and they just loved it. And they ended up purchasing a piece of property on Lake Grove Road, a little bit to the north of the Lake Grove Hotel. But it was up on a bluff, so there were maybe 15 or 20 steps up from the lake to that house. And his great-grandmother didn't like that with children, so they sold that house, and then they built another house on what's now called Lake Grove Trail, and they built that in the early 1900s.
Wow.
And that house is still in the family. Scott's cousins own it, and it is 3 doors down from where we are now. So we're still right in the neighborhood.
Amazing.
And Scott has been coming up here since he was 6 weeks old. And so I've been coming up here since I met him. So we've been married 48 years, so that's a long time.
That is a long time. That's quite a history.
So we love it here, and we lived in the Washington, D.C. area and spent a number of years living overseas.
And you're a nurse by training.
Yes, I am a nurse.
You have been a practicing nurse, or have been for many, many years.
Yes.
Especially in Washington.
Yes, I worked in
infectious diseases, or
I worked for the health department in Alexandria, Virginia, and one of my responsibilities my final year, which happened to have been the H1N1 flu year, was infectious diseases and the immunization program. And that I was not sad to retire after that. I was exhausted.
It just comes around, doesn't it?
It does, it really does. So we were preparing for pandemic flu back then, and I retired in 2010. So this is not new to people in the public health community. We've been expecting it for a long time. So anyway, we both retired in 2010, and we moved to Petoskey. We actually weren't in this house. We were in another cottage that Scott's parents had bought a few doors the other side of the family cottage, and we were there, but it was a summer cottage, and so we had a condo at Harbor Watch in Petoskey, and we would
that's nice.
7 miles north for the winter and then 7 miles south for the summer.
It's like being in Bayview and
exactly,
being in Petoskey.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but this house was built by Scott's parents in the late 70s, and they lived in it for about 5 years. And then they had sold it and moved back into their other cottage. It's a long story. I won't go into all the gory details. But it happened to be coming on the market in 2013. And when we saw that, we were like, whoa. So
Came full circle,
and we were able to sell both the cottage and the condo and buy this house and be here year-round. And we love being on the lake year-round. So
it is wonderful, and you don't need to go to the tunnel of trees, do you?
No.
Your view across the lake and coming down Resort Pike Road.
This year especially has been just, I went to town a few days ago and driving along along Resort Pike, and I was just like, wow, this really is a spectacular year for the colors.
It is a spectacular year. I think that I have a beautiful drive coming from Burt Lake down 131 into Petoskey, but driving this morning on Resort Pike, I thought,
wow,
it is just
It is.
Spectacular.
It is
Spectacular.
indeed.
So somewhere along 2011, 12, 13, somewhere in there, you made the acquaintance of Bob Pattengale,
That's
I
correct.
think.
That's correct.
And the rest is history, as the saying goes, because then you more than dipped your toe into the Great Lakes Chamber Orchestra. So tell us about your meeting with Bob and arm twisting and all of that.
Well, Bob and Alice and I were singing together in the choir at the First Presbyterian Church in Harbor Springs.
Okay.
And we got to know them. In fact, Scott's brother at one point had worked in Alice's father's grocery store, Newman's grocery store,
Oh, come on.
when he was a teenager. So there was a little, family old time connection there too. And Alice and I were both sopranos, and we'd sit together and we got to, know each other. So, and they're neighbors. They're only about less than a mile away from us on Lake Grove. And so we chatted up and got to know them and got together a few times socially. And I don't know, at some point Bob said, Dibby, I'd really like you to come on the Great Lakes Chamber Orchestra board. I think you should come on the board. And I'm like, me? Why? What do I know about any of that stuff? I'm a public health nurse.
Chopsticks.
I can play the piano, I can sing, but that's about it. I'm not.
You play bells too.
And handbells.
Yes,
That's true.
handbells.
And I did play viola in junior high school.
I did too in high school.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, high school I switched over to choir, and that was the end of orchestra.
You're right.
But
Exactly.
so I thought about it, and I couldn't come up with a real good reason to say no, and so I said, well, okay, but I don't know why. And so I came on the board and didn't have any idea what committee to go on, because I knew nothing about fundraising, I knew nothing about programming, I knew nothing about any of that stuff. So I came on the board, and then we needed a secretary at that point. Charlie McInnes was being both secretary and treasurer, and that seemed like a lot for any one person to do.
Sure.
So I volunteered to be the secretary. I had been a secretary in other organizations, and I do know how to do that.
And there were a lot of volunteers running the organization at that time, weren't there?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We had Nancy Koski was our part-time executive director,
Okay.
and everything else was essentially
Sure.
volunteer
Sure.
or
Of
short-term
course.
contracts.
A young organization.
Exactly. And so then in the process of that and being on the executive committee and learning more about the organization, and there were concerns at that time about financial long-term stability, and they were not unfounded. We had some issues that we needed to deal with. And I felt strongly that one of the things we needed was a full-time executive director, and started to work on that project. And we actually wrote a grant to the Fry Foundation requesting assistance to hire a full-time executive director. And the Fry Foundation came back and said, we'd really like you to have an organizational assessment done, which we will pay for, to help figure out what should you do.
Is this the time? And yeah.
And so they sent us a wonderful consultant who came and met with all of the people involved with the orchestra and talked to people who were just consumers of the orchestra product, so to speak, and wrote a wonderful, 20-page assessment of the organization. And his main recommendation was that we needed to get full-time staff. So, yay, okay.
Oh,
He had
that's
a lot of really important recommendations,
Sure.
and a lot of
course.
board strengthening ideas, and a lot of really good meat for things to do. So we began to go down that path, and slowly but surely we did get first a part-time and then a full-time executive director. Of course, I came on in 2012, which was also right when Matt Hazelwood passed away. And so we were suddenly without a conductor, music director, and so we had that whole process of finding a new director. And as people will recall, we had multiple concerts where the different candidates would come and conduct the orchestra and have a chance to work with the orchestra, and the orchestra to work with them, and the audience to interact with them as well.
Of course.
And so that was very helpful, and of course a series of interviews, and we had a committee, and
It
Bob,
gets
of course, was a
intensive.
big
Yes.
role on that committee.
Exactly.
It was very intensive, but we finally settled unanimously on Libor, and so I'm very proud of having selected Libor for our music director.
Absolutely.
And went down the path of executive director searches, and at one point we were between executive directors when we hired you, and so I filled in for, I don't know, 3 months maybe, just sort of hanging out at the office every day and trying to keep the balls more or less
in the air,
without letting too many drop at once.
Yes,
and
exactly.
realized what an amazing, complicated, and challenging role that is. And so I'm also very, very proud that we hired Judy Zorn to be our executive director,
Well,
because she has just taken the balls, not the ball, the balls, and kept them all going.
Thank you. Well, I don't know about that, but thank you. And I do remember that the process, and you were one of the first people that I met. And of course, we've developed this wonderful friendship, and you are just such a wonderful go-to person with all the history that you have. And I know you, even now, we still converge on writing grants, some of the grants together, and the data arts profile and all of that. So that's just a very big piece of what you're still contributing to the orchestra, kind of behind the scenes, where maybe people don't really realize that. But you've done so much to stabilize the organization and help it grow and become much stronger and more viable in the community.
Well, thank you. It was not just me. We had a really good team. We always did have a good board. We've brought on some great new people, but we had some really strong people on the board with me, and I ended up staying president. Well, I became president within about a year of coming on the board, which was another sort of accident. But I ended up staying in that role for 4 years, which was intense and time consuming, but it felt very worthwhile, and it felt like it was worth continuing. I was ready to step down when the time came, and I'm so thrilled that Dan has become such a strong and wise, good president. So I feel very good about the board.
Exactly. Now. And we are, as you just alluded to, we are where we are today because of the strong leadership in the past and all of the many people that have contributed in so many different ways to the orchestra and helping to shape it and make it strong. And so now we can take that and just keep moving that in what is an unprecedented and certainly interesting, I guess, time as we are looking now to how and when do we get back to live performance.
Right. Yeah, life has definitely been different this year, shall we say. We've all gotten to know Zoom really well, and to remember to mute and unmute at the appropriate times, and how to log in. And I spend a lot of time on Zoom meetings and even Zoom family calls, which has been fun. There have been some upsides to it in terms of learning some of these new ways to keep in touch with people. We're in the process of setting up a meeting with 2 couples on the West Coast that we've been trying to figure out a way to all get together somewhere, that we've been friends since the 70s when we were all in Bolivia together. So we're finding new ways to interact, which is good, but we're also missing that person-to-person contact, and I'm of course missing singing. Being in choirs is a big part of my life, and I'm missing that.
Yes, and I absolutely. It's interesting to think that, okay, are we going to be singing again as a choir or more than 4 or 8 people? And if so, how can we do that and safely and all of those things? So it has been a challenge. I think, it seems that what you just said about the whole internet and the Zoom and the live streaming and the virtual things, I think that's going to be an aspect of the orchestra and many organizations that's here to stay. When we open live again, I think that we still will be doing programs online, whether it's more Tuesday Talks or virtual programming. We're looking now into doing some educational things and maybe having a live component of that, but then also being able to put that online. And particularly where our live performances or live stream performances, like you said, if somebody's in California or somebody's in Florida, or, they can still be part of of the orchestra and hearing our concert and all of that. So it's so. What do you think our first concert back should be, Dibby?
Depends on when it is, I guess. I mean,
Yeah.
if we're going to try to do something before there's a vaccine and we don't need masks and social distancing and all that, I think it needs to be a very small group,
yeah.
spaced on the stage
With strings
with
and,
no voices.
right, right,
Just maybe strings, probably not even horns or reeds because of the air
right.
flow. Unless you want to put a mask on the end of the horns, and then that could be a little weird. So
I know they were talking about. I heard something about pantyhose the other day, and on the end of the horn. Oh, I know, it was Canadian brass.
Oh,
And they were doing an interview, and they said, "Now, are you doing the pantyhose on the end of your trumpet?" You know. No.
well, it'd be better than nothing, I guess, but still, it's a
right,
little
right,
much.
exactly. Well, I know that you've gotten involved in after stepping off the Great Lakes Chamber Orchestra Board, that was not an end for your community involvement, civic and nonprofit involvement. And I know that you're part of the League of Women Voters right now, and probably other organizations. And you know, we'd love to have you back at any time, but we have to spread the wealth, as they say. And you are such an asset to any board and any organization that you decide that you're going to put your energy toward.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I just, keep putting one foot in front of the other and do the best I can. But yeah, I did take on a fairly, well, I'm voter services chair of the League of Women Voters here, which is a huge role.
Now.
Especially right now. I thought
Yes.
I could kind of like slip by this election because we're a very new organization and the election is was so soon, but we've had a couple of voter forums, of candidate forums, and been busy with a lot of different aspects for
Right.
this election round. But we'll get through that and then start gearing up for the next one to be more organized and more ready to go.
Well, we are so fortunate to be in the community where we are because there is so much going on, and this area has so many nonprofits and so many, and of course they're all doing such good work, and together we stand strong by supporting each other. And I know for us, for the orchestra, it's important to be partnering and collaborating with other local nonprofits, and we're always looking for different ways to be together, stand together with
Yes.
somebody else in the community. And I think especially now that's a really important piece
Absolutely.
to staying viable and all of that. Thank you very much for being part of our chat.
Well,
It's
thank you.
just a very casual, wonderful conversation, but I think there are many people out there that obviously know you and Scott and all the wonderful work that you do in our community, but maybe don't realize how important and what a really pivotal role you played with the orchestra during a time when it really needed strong leadership, and here we are today, a very strong, vital organization. I want to thank you for joining us on Tuesday Talks, and I want to thank you all very much for the gifts and the support that you give to the orchestra. We really appreciate it. When it's safe to be back, we will, and we're looking forward to not only live streaming some performances, but being back on the stage. Again, I want to thank you for joining us, and thank you, Dibby,
Thank
for being
you.
here.
Thank you.